Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Morbid Symptoms podcast. And we're doing our almost every week gender, sex, identity war update. And I'm joined by the lovely Tanya. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm all right. I was a bit preoccupied yesterday with the election news and fallout from the United States. So just the really polar responses. So from a glee and celebration to, oh my God.
I know,
A
right?
lot of drama.
It's so hard. Yeah, right? I really, I really commiserate with people who feel bad, and I really celebrate with people who feel good. And that sounds really loopy, but I really do. I've been on both sides, so I totally get it, happy,
Well,
sad.
and also that's why our first thing. So we're going to talk about, get into a bit about the difference between the so-called gender critical response to Trump's election victory. And also it was a red wave. So the Republicans now have the White House, the House of Representatives, the Senate, most of the governorships as well, most of the mayorships, I think. And of course, the Supreme Court is stacked in favor of I guess you would say, conservative interpretation of constitutional law and jurisprudence, that type of thing. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to do the third part of our legal front. 2 weeks ago, we looked through the Kara Dansky amicus brief that she submitted on behalf of Women's Declaration International, that really lays out just the absurdity of treating so-called transgender gender identity as something at all coherent, that's something that laws can be based around, in particular around justification of protecting something that people want to say is a right to transgender health care, health surgeries, especially for minors. And then after that, we looked at the amicus brief that Sex Matters, an organization in the UK, submitted on behalf of a case that's in Scotland that's trying to sort out the mess of having certain deeming laws, they're called, about protecting or acknowledging, affirming people's gender identity when it comes into conflict, which of course it does, between regular old sex-based laws and protections for women. So if you have a women's bathroom, let's say, or a women's changing room, communal, that's obviously nobody was under any confusion about who was supposed to be using that and who wasn't. But now if you have this thing called gender identity and a man says, I identify as a woman, what are businesses and other organizations supposed to do? So that's being sorted out in the courts. And today we're going to focus on an amicus brief that the Attorney General on behalf of the state of Tennessee submitted, or is it Alabama, submitted on behalf of Tennessee, where WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, is a big player, as is Rachel Levine, who is something of health or human services in the Biden administration, who is, from what we can tell, an autogynephilic man who quote unquote identifies as a woman. Rachel has a starring role in this amicus brief, which basically unmasks what WPATH as basically an activist ideological organization in the trappings of medicine.
Yeah.
But don't take our word for it. We're going to go into that, and I will link to the amicus brief that covers, that unmasks in our mind WPATH, as well as the corruption between them and the Biden administration through the person in the office of Rachel Levine. And yes, and then you can make your own decision. But we're not going to go through the whole amicus brief because it's something like 82 pages. But you can feel free to, especially any lawyer-minded people or legal studies people might find all the ins and outs of interest. But we're going to focus on the meat of the matter.
Yeah.
So that's our two agenda items today. So make women female again. Based on what you saw in Twitterverse, in TERF Twitter, gender critical, ultra Twitter. And for people who aren't familiar, those of us who are on the side of reality and like, okay, society won't function if you both want to have woman mean adult human female and an identity that men identify in and out of. It's a contradiction, obviously, and it causes problems, especially when the idea hits reality in sports or rape crisis centers or hospital wards or prisons or your, the ladies' room, even girls' sports in middle school. So, or even grade school. So this is where we're at. Anyway, so I guess we found out. God, it seems like it was days ago. But what's your impression about this in terms of how people are fighting about how to respond to what Trump's victory means in the United States in terms of the sex versus gender identity war?
Right. Well, we're all armchair experts. Even those of us who aren't Americans,
Yeah.
we all know so well what's going to happen. There's a lot of stress. I think TERFs have been really stressed for the past few years. And the first thing that Biden did when he got into office was start making some wonky decisions about who gets to call himself a woman, right?
Mhm.
So I think there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. Of course, the pro-Trump side I saw more pro-Trump TERFs, quite honestly, and for different reasons, but mostly I think they had the sort of idea that, you can't protect reproductive rights if you don't even know what a woman is. So there was no reason to vote for Kamala. There were some women who really couldn't deal with the idea of Trump. They just didn't like him. I don't know. My main priority is kind of trying to jolly everybody up so that, we remember that we are the movement, right? It doesn't really matter who gets in. We still have to hold their feet to the fire. We have to stay united.
Mhm.
So let's not argue about Trump or Kamala or
Yes, and
that's
for
what I
me,
was
it's just the one. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you didn't cut me off. You didn't. I
Ah,
was super happy because U.S. Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, friend of the Pritzkers, lost his job. Goodbye, Rahm.
bye,
I think I even
Ron.
tweeted, "Don't hit you on the way out." I'm sorry for
Yeah,
those of you who are sad, but we're celebrating. Goodbye, goodbye. The witch
yeah.
is dead. Oops, am I supposed to say that? It was just the song. Just the song from The Wizard of Oz. That's all. Sorry, just
Yeah, no,
meandering.
it's all right. So for me, this is the one. There may be two silver linings. Of course, we'll see because, as Hegel told us, the owl of Minerva flies at dusk. So it'd be hard to tell right now what's going to happen. But looking out of it, the two silver linings of the Trump victory. And I have to say, I didn't know how I was going to feel because I was kind of, pox on both their houses. The duopoly must go. They both serve capital interests. It's just a
Right,
game. It's a Game of
right,
Thrones, but nobody wants to break the wheel. It's just kind
right,
of they take turns playing offense and defense while
right.
the basic
Totally.
levers of the political economy and foreign policy just keep rolling on along. So I was,
Right.
I was just, so that was my thing. But I have to be honest, when I woke up yesterday and I checked my phone, I'm like, huh, I have a also a good feeling in there, you know. So I realized that I wanted the Democrats and Kamala Harris to lose more than I didn't want Trump and the Republicans to win. And a lot of it
Right.
has to do with this stuff,
Yeah,
you know. And they're
sure.
just so elitist and snobbish, and the only
Yeah,
possible reason that anybody could have for not sharing their views and voting the way they do is because they're stupid or they're racist or they're sexist or they're they
I
have
know.
um indoctrinated, or what they call it, yeah, white supremacy or something like that. God forbid it could be any kind of reflection in there. Again, not that I'm
Right.
here to sing Trump's praises. He
No, no,
talks
not at all.
some good populist game, but in general, at least the first time around when his administration, we can look at what they do, wasn't that different at all from what came before. But the
Right?
rhetoric was obviously his style is quite
Right.
different, and he made them nervous by kind of giving his thumb down to NATO and who knows what.
Right.
But anyway, on this, it seems that and there's thing again with my impression of Trump, and I have no insider knowledge. I think he likes things that are quick and easy, especially on his part. So when it comes to undoing what the Biden administration did on Title IX, where it added gender identity to Title IX. So again, you have this where you have schools that get public funding have to accommodate quote unquote gender identities, which of course is a problem, affects girls most of all.
Yeah.
In reality, of course, it does. It's also problematic to solidify this notion that that there's this thing called gender identity that can be disaligned with your sex, and that these things are separate and can be mixed and matched around. However, he can, as my understanding is, he can undo that quite quickly. So the things he can do with executive orders can be done quite quickly. And of course, there's also stuff that, since they have both houses of Congress, that it also they could do something to re-solidify the fact that woman in law means human female. So a woman, so we have to, everyone knew this before a few years ago, so that the category of woman refers to adult human females, and the category of girl refers to children human females, child human females, and then the opposite for boys and men, and be done with it. That's for the purpose of law and policy. That's what these categories refer to. Duh. And then they'll have to figure out what they want to do with all this gender identity stuff. People who are now who have been used to getting their way, and all the organizations and associations and various money-making things that have been all up in this gender industry Inc. How that's going to work out, I don't know. So I think that I'd be surprised. I'd be very surprised if they didn't do something on Title IX right away. And I'd be very surprised if they didn't try to do something at the federal level about banning these so-called gender-affirming care for minors at the federal level. Other than that, who knows? And I think it's also because, unlike the Democratic side or the liberal side, and not just the liberals, but most people call them progressives, and most people who actually say they're Marxists and materialists or communists have somehow either swallowed this whole or don't want to make the pronoun mafia mad. But another reason why I think that this will happen under Trump is because you have people in the media like Megyn Kelly and others who aren't afraid to say, hey, look, women are female. This is crazy. We got to roll this back. You can't just identify in and out of your sex because you make up a notion of gender identity. So dress how you want, call yourself, change your name if you want. But when it matters, you don't get to have everybody affirm your female persona or your opposite sex persona or your non-sex, non-binary, triple binary, whatever the frick it is. So I think that's I think that's another reason why, because even if he loses interest in this or whatever it is, or he just, whoever gets to him or whatever, there are a lot of women who aren't afraid of being called right wing or hold it as an emblem of pride, who will push this issue. So I think that's why I think when one of the silver linings of this victory is this stuff will get pushed back, and it needs to be pushed back. We need to put Pandora, but we need to close Pandora's gender box.
Right. You know what? I'm sorry. My awful child texted me, and so I missed it.
It's okay. It's okay.
I said don't. I said anyways. You know how this goes.
It's basically just we talked about this beforehand. Just basically why, even if I'm not saying that when people are like, oh, because the reason why I'm bringing this up is because Julie Bindel, which is kind of ironic, who is a well-known feminist, gender critical feminist in the UK, was bashing on women who thought that this was in any way a victory on our side. And it's completely ironic because she is a undying labor devotee who has been terrible, uniquely terrible on this issue. So for her to be like, oh, these women who think that somehow blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, yeah, I don't know. Some of them may trust Trump, whatever. And that we'll see what happens with that. but it's also that there's a movement behind this on the right side, or women and others who aren't afraid, who aren't silenced if you call them right wing or far right. They could give a shit, who will push him on this. So Riley Gaines still have notoriety. Megyn Kelly is on this, and others who are going to be like, look, and it's easy for him to do, as far as I am aware, to undo what Biden did in terms of Title IX, and to pass something at the federal level about banning these human vivisection, Dr. Genderstein, fun game house gender clinics. You can see I don't hide my feelings on this, for minors.
No,
Other than that, yeah, I don't know, and what the response will be, but
we don't know.
Yeah, but
Well,
one of the reasons why we've been
gnashing of the teeth.
Yeah, but it's also that they can take this to court, and that's fine, and I welcome it. Take it to court, because what we've seen from the last 2 episodes that Tanya and I have done, that'll be up soon. I'm editing them. They were live, but I'm editing them. We went through the amicus briefs that have been submitted by people like Women's Declaration National, by the wonderful Kara Dansky, and also by I also mentioned earlier, by Sex Matters. You see that it's really impossible for me to see this holding up in law.
Yeah, well,
I mean, because there's just nothing there.
No, there really
besides besides non-definitions, obfuscation, sleight of hands, all this stuff. So it could, obviously law can be an ass, so that's also possible, but I think that will happen.
I hope that they are able to stop the legal falsification of sex. I'm 100% convinced that, all of these things, the surgeries for the gender affirming care, the so-called gender, all of this stuff, if there's no big prize of being allowed to get fake ID and, not having a legal right to go into the wrong spaces, then this whole thing just collapses on itself. It really does. We have to cut off the head of the snake. And sure, I mean, the thing is like, there are some places that say, okay, we've banned surgeries for young people up to 16 years old, or even up to 17 years old, or, we make all these little tweaks. Is that going to be good enough? As long as people, parental rights in schools, and they've really convoluted this. Just quit legal falsification. Make women a protected category that no one can identify into.
Make women female again.
Right.
I mean,
So, sure, you can have your genitals rearranged. You can go ahead and do that. You can change your name, and, kids can, whatever, let them do that. But there's no reward in the end, because you still have to take your body into the right sex bathroom. You still have to take your body into the right sex sport. If you go to jail, you got to go with your right sex. I really think, and you know what, actually, I was gratified to read the Twitter account of Candace Jackson, who's an American lawyer, and she was saying that too. So I'm glad that there are women who think like that. I mean, that's a really big deal, I think. Just cut off the head of the snake, which is legal falsification.
Which is why the language is so important, and getting rid of this, trying to get rid of the idea that this is kind, because it's in the long run, and it's not kind for anybody except for people who get to enact their persona, their opposite sex persona all day, rather than only in certain instances or venues. I totally agree, because if there's the understanding that, no, we're not going to recognize your quote unquote gender identity in law. Yeah. And that also parents would realize, if they get on this train, that don't expect everything to be opened up for the kid you've transed. Right. That just because you decide that your boy is a girl, that everybody else is going to go along with that. Right. Don't be selling this fantasy. Right. I think it's really important, because it is a falsification of sex. It's fraud. It's sex fraud. Yeah, it is fraud. Yeah, we all have to everybody has a sex. It's determined by at conception. It matters, and you can't change it. Literally can't change it. Only you can play language games and change some aesthetics, but that's the important thing to get across, is that, and yeah. So we'll see. So hopefully that starts to happen, that if to the extent they're able to roll it back to that extent, to be like, no, we're not going to codify this notion of gender identity, this notion that woman and female are not connected, that you can have male women and female women. No, we're not going to do that in law. We're not going to support that politically. What people do in their private lives, it's one thing, but don't expect us to be accommodated or for us to compel people to go along with it.
Right.
Don't want to.
Right.
We'll see. That's the best case
We'll
scenario.
see. I mean, I think people go, wow, how could we even do such a thing? That would be so restrictive and unliberal. And, but we have to remember that just because we're in the middle of the diorama doesn't mean there's nothing outside. Like, there are other countries in this world that don't let people to change their sex markers. I mean, I shared a tweet about Putin's Russia, and of course nobody liked it. But the fact that there are still places, that will say, well, no, you're not a woman because you're born a man, you're still a man. That should encourage us. We don't have to change our politics, but
and also, and that's a great point, because when you're in the middle of it, it seems like, oh, it's gone too far. People are there's too many powerful interests behind this, and too many people who've done too many things to themselves or others
right.
to want to unwind this. But there's a lot of things that seem that way, that now we look back and like, oh my God, I can't believe that took so long to get around. So there was a time, and not that I want to equate this to the severity of slavery, but there was a long time, most of human history, where the idea of there not being slavery would be like, what?
No kidding. How are you going to build anything?
Like, what do you mean?
Or giving women the vote, sure.
That's crazy talk.
Anyway, really, it's hilarious.
So, yeah, well, I was going to say something and I forgot. I guess it doesn't matter. Anywho, so so hopefully, one of the silver linings is that Trump can quite easily, as my understanding is, undo the mess that the Biden administration made, or maybe it started with Obama, Title IX, and that will help with sports, women's girls sports in public schools, and then do this ban on this crazy gender medicine stuff for minors. I think it should be banned outright, but that's my personal thing. There's a lot of crazy plastic surgery that we allow. You see those people who are allowed to people do all kinds of things to their faces.
Yeah, so, I think that's really scary too. But
that becomes a more easier thing. Like, okay, that's a personal choice, whatever. You would hope that would be a flag that maybe somebody isn't making the, if they go in for their 50th plastic surgery, maybe there's something going on there, but that's a separate issue. This one is getting this out of law, and that hopefully, like you said, that when people realize that there's not this guaranteed pathway, that you're not going to be able to get carte blanche to go into women's spaces or girls' spaces because you declare a gender identity. I think that would drop the numbers of people identifying as women quite quickly.
Right.
Because what's the reason of doing that? I mean, you want people to regard you as a woman, but the reason you want the legal justification, either just to justify your fantasy or to reaffirm your fantasy, but also so then you can push your way into women's spaces.
A friend was telling me that she went out for dinner with some friends. One of them had a daughter who thinks she's a boy, and that she might have said something to offend she might have made some small faux pas. And I was thinking, what a burdensome friend that is. That this mother, well, the parents, they've let their child do this, and they expect every single person that they run across to sort of go along with it and never put their and it makes awkwardness for people. Like, I think that's shocking. And the fact that our society has got to that point where now it's everybody's business to coddle my child's mental issue whim, and then normal people who are just going about their business have to feel all worried. Oh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I do that? That's just the smallest thing. Nobody's getting hurt. Nobody's losing an opportunity. Nobody's dying. That's just the smallest thing. But God, why? Like, we have enough to worry about in this world without kind of, oh, it's just the shocking entitlement of some people. Sorry for the rant, but
No, I agree. And this thing that I don't know what happened. That's why I like the big sister regime as opposed to big brother. And of course, big sister can be a man identifying as a woman or also women.
sure,
That we're responsible or somehow we're bad if we're not sympathetic to everyone and everything. And it's
right.
like, I don't give a flying F about certain things. I just don't. And I shouldn't have to. So
No,
I don't, if there's people who really, really want to be the opposite sex, okay, but I'm not going to spend time worrying about it. And I'm certainly not going to say we should enable it. It's like, that's for
right,
you to figure out. Sort that out. God bless, or God bless,
right.
or whatever. I just don't care.
No, right.
It's not our, it's not our ability. It's not our need to care. And I'm not saying they should be, banned and isolated someplace or whatever, but there has to be certain boundaries, reasonable, logical boundaries.
Right. Making
Yeah,
everybody jump through hoops.
yeah.
Oh,
And I'm not
it's
going to let you
ridiculous.
educate me about how you really think you're a woman because you're not.
No, no, right? And don't presume on people's friendship
But,
either.
if you want to believe that and you have this persona and you like to take her out and do whatever, that's your business as long as it's not, you know,
Right?
infringing on us in reality. It's, do you. But yeah, this
Okay.
idea that you have to be, we're constantly getting this, that, oh, why can't we just be sympathetic to this small minority of group who really suffer because of their gender dysphoria? I'm like, yeah, I'm not buying it.
No,
Not buying it.
no. And
It's not a type of
I think
person. Yeah. It's a
parents just want
phase or it's a
control.
condition. It's not a type of person. So
No, no, it's not.
deal with it.
It's not.
And again, we
Deal
talked
with
about this
it.
before, that dysphoria just means unhappy,
Yeah. Age
upset.
dysphoric. Need a t-shirt.
Yeah. So
Nothing to cure that but death. I'm afraid.
So if you're really
My age
dysphoric about
dysphoric.
something for a long period of time, yeah, for sure, go seek therapy and help and whatnot, but don't make it into an identity that we have to affirm and build up a whole medical industry around it.
No,
Huge
no.
psyop.
It is. It's a
Institute, a multi-institutional gaslighting
no
somehow.
kidding. Yeah, no kidding.
And I'm sure a
We're
lot of
all
people in all these institutions are aware. There's eyebrow raising all the time, like, oh, we're doing this now, but just kind of starts to become
yeah,
normal.
yeah. That's right. They're trying to normalize it. It's really
Mhm,
weird. It's so weird.
mhm. It's like, no, there's two types of women now, male women and female women. What? Oh yeah, gender
Right?
identities and they can change and it's fluid and it's this and that, whatever. It's like, okay. Sounds like
Some
astrology
kid
to
that
me, but even more, astrology was rude on something, the constellations and the movements of the planets and whatnot. This stuff is
astrology tried to explain something. This tries to
mhm,
hide something. It tries to yeah, it's ridiculous.
mhm,
Imagine seeing some kid that you saw, grow up that played with your kid down the street, and all of a sudden this kid is saying, "Oh, I'm a boy," and it's the whole neighborhood has to deal. I'm
mhm,
shocked. I'm shocked at people
mhm.
like.
Yeah. Anywho, so hopefully that is one of the silver linings of the red wave that swept across
Right.
America. I mean, I was waiting
Let's
for it to
see. Let's
happen
see.
because I was looking at some of this
Right.
stuff and like, okay, some of it has gone so crazy. There's going to be a backlash,
Right.
to like
There has
calm
to be.
down
Yeah.
people.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm worried about, that they're gonna use this as sort of a political football, right? Like reproductive rights on the other side.
Mm,
That they don't wanna fix it because it's so lovely and juicy and
yeah. For them
keeps
to,
everybody tied to their
mm,
vote, and I'm
mhm.
a little bit worried about that. And then, Trump Trump was photographed with Jenner. Jenner
Oh,
was
yeah.
was tweeting photos of herself with Trump.
Mhm,
We know that Jenner uses the women's we know that, like, come on.
mhm.
So we know
He's
that
on film using
we
that. He
know
was
that
like, oh, I have to use the women's room now. It's like, no, you don't. No, you
right?
don't.
And didn't Trump say, like, "You can use my gold toilet in the women's" I don't know.
Oh, that was a while ago. We'll see. Again, it just, but also like everybody else, that how you are face to face with somebody and you want to be accommodating and whatever and whatever. But again, where there's a reason why we have certain institutions and roles for people who are supposed to put that to the side and do what's logically and legally and morally correct to the best of their ability, which is not enabling men who want to pretend that they're the opposite sex by giving them a free range pass. No. All right.
No.
So
Okay.
now into what WPATH. So WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Doesn't it sound professional?
I love their logo. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The little blue.
So it's just all, it's very scientific and very medicine-y. And look, it's pink and blue. What could be wrong? So transgender health. This assumes that there's something called transgender materially, biologically, that requires a separate specialty and menu of pharmaceutical and surgical interventions. Yes?
No kidding.
Again, which is another contradiction,
like,
because
this journey.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was thinking something. One of the contradictions is that sometimes they want, oh no, it's a gender identity. It's an innate sense of if you're male or female or both or neither. And it's just kind of this, it's very much like a spiritual, metaphysical type of thing that's supposed to override the material body. But then you have all this other stuff. You have the psychology, no, gender dysphoria. Oh my God, it's so debilitating, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the medical part of it, which is like, well, if it's innate, spiritual, metaphysical, why does that involve pharmaceuticals, surgeries, all this legal apparatus?
Conditions, yeah.
It's just like, what is it? It's not like you have Christian care or Scientology care or goth care or I don't know, whatever, hipster care.
Right. Well, I'm sure they would try to monetize that if they could too.
Yeah.
Maybe if this doesn't work out for them.
So what we're going to dive into now is what should be a huge controversy in terms of the world of quote unquote transgender healthcare, gender affirming care, or whatever it is, gender pediatric surgery. Can you imagine there's such a thing as a gender pediatric surgeon? Anyway.
It's terrible.
And so there are standards set by WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. So they have this thing called Standards of Care, and there's version 8. And it's a set of guidelines that are widely adopted and referred to by doctors and medical clinics, etc., who quote unquote provide care to transgender to gender people. Which has no coherent material definition, which we've covered before.
Right.
But recent legal cases have revealed some really troubling claims about how these guidelines came together, how scientific they are, and really if this association is fraudulently presenting itself as based on science and medicine when it's actually more ideological and political.
Right.
So what happened is there's an Alabama amicus brief. And an amicus brief is basically somebody that people can write an amicus brief to a court if they think they have something that the court should want to hear or needs to hear that maybe the other people involved in the case aren't presenting. And usually, of course, the court will probably look at, okay, who is this person or this organization? What is their standing here? But Alabama had banned just quote unquote gender affirming care stuff for minors. And throughout their case, they came across some troubling, they discovered some troubling issues with WPATH that gets cited all the time about standards of care and really is intricate and affirming and making it seem like there's something material and objective there that would require this medical apparatus and treatments when actually perhaps it's, pure ideology, bordering on theology. So they wanted to make sure that there's a similar case going on in Tennessee, I believe. Again, somebody's taking Tennessee to court and say that no, this ban against so-called gender-affirming care for minors is, I don't know, well, I guess illegal. They want to say that's discriminating against quote unquote transgender youth and whatnot. So anyway, Alabama filled out this amicus brief to be like, FYI, Tennessee, here's what we found during our case in defense of this ban on these experimental procedures. So so basically the gist of it, and I will add in the video description later the link to the full amicus brief from the Alabama Attorney General's office to the Tennessee Supreme Court because it's quite long. But basically the gist is that what WPATH is more a product of ideology and political maneuvering than anything that we would call that anyone would call scientific. So one of the things that becomes clear in the amicus brief from the Alabama Attorney General's office is that you have a lot of political manipulation behind these guidelines. Behind these guidelines for so-called transgender care. So the idea that it was influenced not by science but more by political pressure, especially from certain U.S. government officials. According to Alabama's brief, Admiral Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health, regularly communicated with WPATH leaders. At one point, Levine reportedly pushed WPATH to remove age limits for various quote unquote gender-affirming surgeries to avoid restrictive legislation. The brief even quotes one of the members saying to Levine, Levine was very concerned that having ages, mainly for age restrictions, will affect access to healthcare for trans people. And then she asked them asked them to remove them.
Right.
So, and for those who don't know, here is Admiral Rachel Levine, who is male, went through the military, had a wife and kids. I don't know if he's still married to his wife or not, and then decided that he had to be the woman he always was. Came out as a quote unquote transgender woman, so sex mimic, allegedly, and this is the person who is the point person apparently between the U.S. government and WPATH. So. Right. That's who Rachel Levine is. And Rachel Levine was like, no, don't. Let's take out the age restrictions. That's going to cause problems.
Right. And we know that Genevieve Gluck and Redux found all of these. Can I say this word?
Go ahead.
Well, all these nasty pedophile forums on the WPATH inside the forum. So, there's more to that's not just, he's not just like, oh, sure, who cares about your kid's health? I'm not accusing him, but WPATH, I mean, people should read Redux and Genevieve Gluck's work because
they want to say that eunuch is a gender identity, that's right. Which is, a eunuch is a castrated man. Of course, bottom surgery, gender-affirming bottom surgery for males is castration. So I don't know how, but here, this is another contradiction. So if a man goes in and gets quote unquote bottom surgery and gets his penis taken off and has some sort of fake vagina or curated for him.
I like how they call them Frankenholes.
And the perineum, line, has this perineum line with this former penis, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, but we can't call that a eunuch. No, that's a quote unquote trans woman. I mean, it's just the linguistic foolery is, but language, obviously, that's our software, people. Language, what you put in starts to sound, even when it first sounds crazy to you, if you keep on hearing it, especially if you hear it from places and people who have the aura of authority, it starts to be like, oh, okay. You get people now who think that there are some humans who are literally transgender, like born, like, there's like a third sex, or or they think that you can actually transition.
Yeah.
That the products provided by these people are good enough to really, you come out to the different sex.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That's a separate issue. The pedagogical problem is interesting. But yeah, so and for those of you who saw What is a Woman by Matt Walsh, Marcy Bowers is one of the head honchos, and I think maybe one of the people who started WPATH.
He's certainly influential. He did Jazz Jennings's
so the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, and Marcy Bowers, wink wink,
he loves the limelight.
who was a male, does a lot of, I think might be the person that's in the most quote unquote gender surgery. Again, I defy you to find on the human body where the gender is, but that's another issue.
No kidding.
So this is who is really, I don't know. Anyway, Marcy is part of WPATH. I think maybe from the beginning. I'm not sure. And again, this is what Marcy used to look like before he had the buffet of, I think he's probably had all the work done. I don't know though. I can't say, but like the facialization surgery and the trimming of the Adam's apple and the moving the hairline. I think that he has had it all done. Who knows? Anyway, so just FYI, that's fine. Okay, so the removal of age limitations. So here's a quote from the brief that really underscores how political goals were steering the so-called medical recommendations. WPATH initially told Levine we can't just drop the age minimums, citing a review process. But Levine's office kept up the pressure, and eventually WPATH removed the age limits entirely. This led one member to admit, I don't know how I feel about allowing U.S. politics to dictate international professional clinical guidelines. And again, the stuff that they're presenting in this amicus brief is what came out during discovery and their trial for a similar thing in Alabama. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about U.S. politics dictating professional clinical guidelines.
Wow.
It's just kids' bodies and minds. La la la. And of course, I would say that if you have people like this, yes, and people like this, you might. I think it's worthwhile thinking, why are they so interested in quote unquote trans kids and gender affirming care for kids? Could it be that it affirms their quote unquote gender identity? Yeah,
totally.
So if this is something normal, natural, whatever, even though it requires all this medical intervention, we'll leave that contradiction to the side. If they're like this in middle age, well, I was probably like this from the beginning. Too bad I couldn't have had all this fantastic stuff. So it makes sense that if you want to really push gender ideology, there's something as gender identity that overrides or can not align with somebody's sex, and it's more important, blah, 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 you have to do all this stuff, then of course you're very much invested in bolstering this notion of the trans kid and gender affirming pediatric care. Because if that falls apart, then it leads to questions about all of it. Yeah. Especially because there's all this confusion, like, okay, it's an innate sense of self. No, it's a mental health issue with gender dysphoria. No, it's not, it's this and that, but yet we have to have all this stuff to rearrange everything for people can live on. It's just, yeah.
No.
But
sure,
of course,
it's all meant to distract.
Yeah,
these guys are brazen liars.
So the anchor is law, of course. So you codify this crazy stuff in law, and then you focus on the quote unquote, oh, poor trans kids.
Right.
Which means transing kids, but whatever.
Right.
I would just put that out there, that it's not for nothing that these men who went through their whole life, male puberty, got married, had kids, and then later on decided to quote unquote transition to perform their female persona full time, now are very interested in this issue and don't think there should be any age restrictions. And he's also so just to put that out
And then,
there.
it's not only that, that's totally true. They love their origin stories, right? The big
Yeah.
liars. They love their origin stories, but they, it also makes so much more money. So much more money for, I guess, big pharma. Think about it. They start young. It's just ka-ching. And then you also have these bad men who are invested in the idea that people look like children forever, right? They never it's because they're bad. There's some of them like that too, as the Redux and Genevieve Gluck's investigations of the WPATH. They found all the bad stuff that we don't want to talk about. But yeah, so there's lots of layers to this craziness. When I was a new turf, it was really confusing. Like, why do they want to do that? I don't get it.
We were so naive.
I know. I think it was Julian Vigo first. Yeah, it was first I heard from Julian Vigo, who was saying, they need to do this to establish their own credentials as born this way. Oh, I've always been a little girl.
No, it bolsters this male gender, this niche male sexuality or sexual kink, I should say.
Yep.
Or condition, whatever you want to call it.
Paraphilia. Yeah.
Oh, these poor kids, if only when I first started to dress up in my sister's clothes, if only I had this avenue, it's just, okay, projection. Let's see. So, yes. So they were concerned about having the U.S. politics dictate international professional clinical guidelines around so-called gender-affirming pediatric care. So there's evidence. So they also talk about in this amicus brief evidence suppression and conflicts of interest. So it's not just the politics at play. Alabama's brief claims that WPATH knowingly avoided conducting rigorous evidence reviews, especially for pediatric care, precisely because the evidence was weak. Instead of admitting this, WPATH chose to keep things vague to avoid what they saw as, in quotes, an untenable position in terms of affecting policy or winning lawsuits, end quote. So yes, they made a strategic decision not to dig into the science because they were worried the science wouldn't hold up.
Shocking. It's really shocking. The
Again,
world professional,
yeah. So, World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They just apparently, but I think this is interesting because sometimes I wonder. You can make an institution or an organization, and I wonder if there's any clarification about what you can name it and what you can't name it, because you're like, oh, it's this association of World Professional. So you would think, okay, this is a doctor, like maybe like psychiatrists and surgeons and other medical doctors. You would think maybe that, but professional association. You have some rando sexologists in here. You probably have some gender studies people, and then you have some of the quote unquote gender surgeons who happen to be, tricked out. So have their gender kit. Yeah. So there's all this presumed or aesthetics of knowledge and evidence and authority that seems to be applied erroneously to you.
Yes,
I would say.
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. Okay. The brief goes further. Again, the amicus brief, alleging serious conflict of interest among the contributors of the standards of care. According to the document, many of the authors have a direct financial stake in so-called gender-affirming treatments. Dr. Marcy Bowers. Again, let's check out Marcy Bowers. Dr. Marcy Bowers.
Put him right there. There he is.
There, yeah. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you can see this. Well, let's put this up here because this is the front page of the amicus brief that we're basing this segment on. And I'll just read it out because it might not be clear. So in the Supreme Court of the United States is the petitioner, and it's versus Jonathan Skrmetti, Attorney General and reporter for Tennessee et al. Respondents. And this is a brief of Alabama as amicus curiae supporting state respondents. And the person whose name is first on this amicus brief is Steve Marshall, who's the Attorney General of Alabama, followed by Edmund LaCour Jr., who's the Solicitor General, Counsel of Record, A. Barrett Bowder, Principal Deputy Solicitor General, and they're all located at the State of Alabama Office of the Attorney General. That's where this is coming from or based on, so you can check it out yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. Okay, sorry. So Dr. Marcy Bowers, for example, made more than $1 million last year from providing quote unquote transitioning surgeries. And yet WPATH didn't consider this conflict worth disclosing. So it's again, you have this organization that's put itself out there as being like the gold standard of quote unquote standards of care for gender affirming surgeries or care, whatever they're calling it.
Right.
And basically providing standards of the care that Dr. Bowers provides and makes money off of. And who also says he's a trans woman. Yeah. Anyway, but no biggie. That doesn't need to be disclosed for people who are using this as, oh, look, we have these standards of care. And people will say this. I'm sure the Tavistock says it. I'm sure all kinds of, that's why they are bringing this out. Like, oh, well, they cite WPATH. Well, WPATH says this, so we're just following the standards of care set out by WPATH. So we're,
we're made up themselves.
Yeah. So you're like, okay. Oh, right. In fact, one contributor admitted everyone involved in the standards of care process has a financial interest. Or non-financial interest. So I guess maybe also there could be a financial interest or a character interest, reputational interest.
Humanitarian interest.
Yeah.
No,
this is a crucial
that's not
point.
on there.
Yeah. This is a crucial point. Even though the brief states that conflicts were known, so these were known internally. They declared no conflicts of interest were deemed significant or consequential in their standards of care that they distribute globally.
So ambitious, such bald-faced liars. I mean, why do I don't know why I'm surprised anymore. Just put that picture of Marcy Bowers.
Brought this out. There's been like a media blackout on this for the last 10, 12 years or whatever. So none of this gets any scrutiny.
No,
and
really.
the scrutiny it does gets demeaned as, oh, it's right wing, or they just hate, they're just transphobic, or they're whatever. Yeah. So it hasn't been at all vetted. It looks like it wasn't vetted, very little vetted internally, very little vetted legislatively, and extremely unvetted media-wise.
Right.
Yeah, because all you hear about in the main media, legacy media, is, oh, they have these great stories of transitioning and how they overcame this and they came out as what they always were, and then we have the movies like with Will Ferrell showing us, oh, look at how great he is, modeling how we should be when your friend of 30 years tells you that he's transitioning to be a woman and he's Harper now, and isn't it great?
Right.
And then all this stuff, and whenever there's any pushback, it's framed as a anti-trans. Yeah. So when someone says,
remember that woman in the elevator?
We don't want boys. Like when it says, like, for example, when people say, look, it's not a good idea. Bodies play sports, not gender identity, whatever that is. So we need to protect women's sports or women's spaces or whatever, or at whatever age. Oh, it's anti-trans.
Yeah. Let trans kids play sport.
Yeah, well, they don't want them to play sports. They don't want this and that and the other. So it's all so it's unsurprising that so much of this stuff has gone under the radar for so long, because it's shrouded in the rainbow flag. It's shrouded as being affirming, as being accepting, as being kind, as being a civil rights issue, as being all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's based on nothing material. It's all subjective and ideological and incoherent, but makes a lot of people a lot of money and affirms personas, people's opposite sex or non-binary personas in law, to the point that you can get in trouble if you don't, try to follow all these new big sister protocols. Yeah.
Brazen. They're brazen. They're brazen liars. It is like brazen is the only word I can. It's just amazing. Incredible.
So let's see if it gets any worse, shall we, Tanya? So the WPATH is riddled with conflicts of interest, but when they put out their standards of care, they say no conflicts of interest were deemed. That's an important word. So they decided for themselves if there was any problematic conflicts of interest that need to be declared. Well, that's handy.
Oh, they're taking care of business. They're being so thorough.
Yeah.
Is this a problem? No, we love it. Okay. Write it on up.
No worries. Yeah. So what we're seeing here, it seems, is a framework for healthcare guidelines that's incredibly compromised. The guidelines aren't just seem to be what influences the least is quote unquote the science, for obvious reasons, because there's two sexes. There's no scientific basis in gender identity.
Right.
Or gender.
Right.
No.
And I bet science
unless you're using it as a synonym for sex. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking maybe science would have something to say about having your genitals rearranged surgically. They might be like, science. Science might say.
Well, it is because it's reducing distress. Yeah. If you're dysphoric, which means unhappy about your female body, if you're a woman, or your male body if you're a man or a girl or a boy, that's you have a bad feeling, and so what they're doing is reducing that bad feeling, ergo it must be somehow good, scientific, etc. Yeah.
You know what? I have a friend who's a wound care nurse of like 30 years. She's a total pro. she's nice to the gender people, but she was telling me that she sees a lot of young women who've had the surgery who come in peeing like out of 4 places because of their rupture.
Of course.
So science is like, I guess science has been, distress is worse than, like feeling sad is worse than peeing out of 4 places. Yeah.
Well, and we know a common problem for the guys. So guys out there, tuck, don't cut, because a lot of the guys who go through the bottom surgery complain of anal leakage. So the apparently the lining, I don't know, between the perineum and where the poop comes out of, there's seepage. So so your fake vagina smells like poop.
Right. And then for the boys who. For the boys,
and no poop. I don't have any poop has never come out of my vagina.
God, no. Can you imagine? For the boys
who've had
the puberty blockers? So they have micro penises, so their penises never grow to adult length. So they don't have enough tissue to make a frankenvag, so they have to use part of the colon, and that also smells bad.
Yeah, and also
but at least they're not feeling sad at night, right?
Yeah,
at least they're not dysphoric.
It's a different. Yeah, now you have a different. You're not worried about that anymore. You're worried about infections and weird smells and having to dilate. Anyway, but fortunately, most men who claim that they're women, most of them don't go in for the full package, the full gender kit. Anyway, I think probably a lot of them just like to get the boobs, but not they don't want to, anyway.
Yeah.
That's a side issue. Right. So,
sorry, getting carried away.
So, and here's another thing. So, Yeah. So people were shaping them. So they were shaped by interests of the very people benefiting from the procedures being recommended, which is kind of a best way of saying it's corrupt. If this is supposed to be is this being touted as an organization that's somehow impartial and just out looking out for the best care for the gender people, gender youth.
Right.
Yeah.
Fighting dysphoria.
Yeah. So another part that they highlight in the amicus brief is there was consensus over evidence. So what do they mean by this? So another point that comes out quite clearly in the Alabama's amicus brief is that the distinction between consensus and evidence. So the WPATH's standards for care guidelines were supposed to be based on systematic reviews and the grade GRADE methodology, a widely respected framework for evaluating evidence quality. But according to the amicus brief, WPATH didn't adhere to that. Instead, what most of the standards of care is based on is consensus. And what this means is the authors agreed on the recommendations. They weren't derived from the evidence,
right?
Peer-reviewed clinical evidence. No, the group of people who comprise WPATH, they decided. There was consensus among them, who also provide who provide these quote unquote services. They decided what the standards of care should be.
Who better to decide? That's, I ask you. Who better? I'm sure science approves. They had science on their side. Science was talking to them.
Yeah,
it's shocking, isn't it? Like,
so
you're laughing, it's actually shocking.
And if people would know, I think people who wanted to know would be a red flag. But if you're not in the know and you're reading this thing and you're thinking, okay, this is WPATH is professionals, so it's medical professionals, psychiatric professionals, and then they say, here are the consensus guidelines, you're going to think that it's based on,
of course,
evidence and clinical evidence. Yeah,
of course. Right.
You're not going to think, oh, they just got around a table with some donuts and coffee and said, yeah, that's good.
No kidding. And then this is also what all of these magazines and fake doctors have been spreading and fighting women with. Oh, Scientific American and all of these crazy,
they cite this organization as if it's somehow not suspect. Okay, so to illustrate this, the brief reveals that the Standards of Care 8 adolescent chapter, many recommendations were given a strong rating, even though the evidence was weak. Here's a line from the brief. The adolescent chapter notes that a key challenge in adolescent transgender care is the quality of evidence. Yet, later they say, they push forward strong recommendations for treatments targeting adolescent transgender quote unquote people. So in one part they say, there's very little, the quality of the evidence is weak, yet we recommend these procedures.
Right. It's unbelievable. It's shocking, really.
And this is giving kids puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones that are not reversible. Right. Yeah, that oftentimes there's been what the evidence does seem to suggest is that once you do that, the likelihood of them carrying on through this to the point of having multiple surgeries, becomes much, much more.
Of course.
Yeah. So first you say, okay, Johnny is Jane, and you decide, okay, we're going to socially affirm. So we're going to call him by a girl's name, and we're going to change his pronouns, and we're going to let him dress like a girl, and we're going to expect the school to go along with this, and our neighbors and everybody. And then, of course, then that makes it easier. That solidifies in the mind. And then you have, then the puberty blockers become more likely. Cross-sex hormones become more likely. And then once you've done that to your kid's body, if you do it long enough time and their equipment doesn't, their reproductive system doesn't go through puberty, you can imagine. And it's not just your reproductive system that goes through puberty, your mind is also changing.
Yes, totally. They
You
stop the
know?
brain growth too with chemotherapy drugs. Puberty blockers are chemotherapy drugs.
Mm. But anyway, oh well.
Terrifying.
Doesn't
It's
matter the
just
evidence this week. So, of course, this raises the obvious question. If guidelines are so evidence light, why are they being treated as gospel in courtrooms and clinics? Why
Yeah.
is WPATH so intent on hiding this weakness?
Yeah. Why?
Well, obvious reasons. Yeah. I mean, these are medical well, not all of them, but some of them, they have to know that this is psychological and subjective. I
Totally.
mean, whatever they convince
And
themselves of. So it's like, no, it's the right thing to do to affirm and to offer all these services, even though, despite the fact that there's no hard evidence to support doing so.
right. And you think that they would all be wealthy enough, all of these surgeons and clinicians of all kinds, but they're supporting a whole industry, right? They're also supporting the poet who writes poems for elementary school kids and makes coloring books of, trans women in your community. Like they're supporting a whole industry. So it's not, don't think that these guys are selfish. They're not. It's a trickle down. It's a trickle down kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of ins and outs and what have yous with the gender industry, which is so funny because this is just an aside. But do you remember
Right.
that I think it was a woman, I'm not sure, who was like, "No one uses the word gender industry. What are you talking about? That's stupid." And I'm thinking, well, what would you call it? If it walks, talks, and acts like an industry, it's an industry.
No doubt. No doubt. It's the gender and I think Jennifer Billick calls it the gender industrial complex for sure. Maybe gender
Mhm.
medical industrial complex.
Yeah.
Like on par with the military industrial complex, that kind of thing. It's a
Yeah.
big rigmarole.
So again, the big thing about this is that these guidelines are evidence light, and what's coming out now is actually what there is evidence of is the detriment, the downsides of these procedures, rather than the upsides of them. But it's being treated as the gospel in courtrooms and clinics. So why are they hiding this weakness? Well, if you've been
Right.
touting all this stuff, you don't want it to come out that you want to keep it going.
Right.
Segment 4. So the self-referencing and international skepticism. So lastly, the Alabama focuses on what they call the circularity of evidence and WPATH standards of care. So they cite
Yeah.
what they do is they cite their own previous guidelines as evidence.
Yeah.
So this is
Totally.
the 8th rendition of the standards of care, and they will cite previous editions as evidence as support of the standards of care that they're suggesting now.
And I'm just looking at those 3 circles in their logo. It's perfect. It's
Yeah.
perfect. They're telling on themselves. They can't help it. It's Duper's delight. Make
Yeah.
3 circles with 3 penises. One of them is piercing the brain of the poor woman who's standing there on the edge. Like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
God in heaven.
Literally gender borged. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding.
So
Well, I'm glad that those lawyers can
okay, so they cite
catch
their
that.
own previous guidelines as evidence, which were then referenced by other organizations, only for WPATH to reference these groups' works in turn. So they have their standards of care. Somebody else references their standards of care. They reference the article that referenced their standards of care as evidence
Right,
to support their next round of standards of care.
right. Perfect. It's neat. It's
It's
neat.
neat.
There's no neater shape than a circle. It's nice. All self-contained and organized and moves,
Yeah.
moves things along. It's a very nice.
So it's not just Alabama that's sounding the alarm. Internationally, countries like the UK, Sweden, Finland are taking a much more cautious approach to pediatric gender care. And isn't it
Right.
amazing that from the beginning there wasn't a cautious approach?
Yeah, it's
When this
shocking.
whole thing was launched, gender care, it just kind of,
Right.
it just kind of trickled along. And now it's
Right.
like, oh, maybe we should approach this cautiously. You think?
Right. No kidding.
We can't assume people. We can't assume that there's good people manning the ships.
No, no, no. What's that awesome quote? Um, don't assume that people are going to understand things when their job depends on them not understanding it. That's not right. That's
Yeah,
not the right quote, but
yeah,
it's that kind of thing, Can you
yeah.
imagine some nurse at Karolinska Hospital going, I don't know, doctor, maybe we shouldn't give
We
this
shouldn't cut
child
off the
chemotherapy
breasts. Yeah.
drugs, right?
Anyway, but they'll feel better. La la la. Okay.
Right.
So the CAS review in the UK, which Alabama references, found that evidence base supporting pediatric gender transition is lacking.
Uh,
Then why were they ever doing it? I mean, it's just the most amazing thing.
Right.
I can't believe I'm still this naive. I don't know.
I know it's
This
always
said,
like, what?
well, because it's one thing if it was adults only. So these people like Marcy Bowers and Rachel Levine who do all this stuff starting in their 30s or 40s or whatever. But kids,
Yeah.
I mean,
No, it's shocking.
and these
It's too
parents who look
disgusting.
like they're so happy, but they took their kid to be trans. I'm like, I don't know what's going on there. Okay, anyway,
No, it's too shocking. And
let's
if
see.
they'd ever said, if they'd ever said this is going to be a really dumb idea, but these men are totally fetish driven, they need to do this to have a sexual life, and that's really important. Then at least they would have been honest, and parents wouldn't be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, my kid's going to be great," because kids
Mhm.
don't have fetishes. But they lie
Well, how
about it,
weird. I
right?
thought that you could only have a boy or a girl. I didn't know you could have a boy that turned into a girl or a girl that turned into a boy. There's just so many
Yeah, well,
options.
right.
Oh, we can come convince some humans are crazy. Okay. Let's see. Sorry.
Go
Yeah,
on.
this led the National Health Service to limit certain treatments for minors. You think it would lead them to limit all of it, but no. Because again, this is rife with
Yeah,
politics.
really.
You have these severe interventions that aren't
Right.
based on anything solid at all. That if anyone thinks about it without the gender borg and the gender speak and the big sister in your mind, you're like, what? But yet,
Yeah.
even when it starts to come out how this isn't evidence based at all,
Mhm.
and or the reason evidence coming out how the downsides are, which are quite, and the fact that it doesn't really do much to alleviate what it's supposed to alleviate anyway, this
Right.
distress, generalized distress. But even then, they don't pump the brakes on it. They just like, well, we'll just kind of we'll add some guidelines. We'll this and that. It's just
I think
crazy.
even
So
Cass
there's the
even
political
Cass tells
interest is
us.
everywhere here, and
Right.
the political slash financial,
Right.
reputational.
Sure.
I think.
Well, there's still a lot of people who should know better saying things like some children will benefit from no, like that's
Yeah.
no, no. Like I'm not a
Yeah.
scientist or a
Yeah. The
clinician, but
true
no, no, no.
the true versus fake gender identities is
Yeah.
like okay.
Yeah, no, come on.
Or just I should say unreal. Because there's people
Yeah.
who do believe this, and there's people who are good actors, actresses. Okay. So here we are. The WPATH standards of care document that's shaping laws and policies on so-called transgender healthcare, even for minors, for kids, seems to be more about politics and legal positioning than it is at all about medical science. So these accusations cut to the heart of what's at stake, the health and well-being of young people during this ongoing, what I would call cultural syndrome, aka gender mentalism. So it's past time to ask questions about what's really driving this stuff. And of
Yeah.
course, we don't have to start that wheel because people like Jennifer Billick and Gender Redux have been doing, if you're religious, God's work by going into the minds of this stuff. But what's
Right.
driving this? It's not science. It's not a scientific based process at all. But yet here we are, as if there is. It's like, why is there gender? Because it's just, I can see why. I understand why there's gynecologists. I understand why there's cardiologists. I understand why
Sure.
there's ear, nose, and throat people and all this stuff. Gender care,
Yeah. Yeah.
gender surgeon,
Right.
gender pediatric clinics. What is this?
Yeah. They have to invent a problem to fix it. They're such brazen liars. So brazen. I mean, they deal in iatrogenic conditions. They make more trouble than they fix. They cause trouble. They're troublemakers. Well, I don't have a good word to say about them, obviously. Not going to be getting any niceness from me.
Yeah. Anyway, so this kind of concludes the legal foundation for the sex gender war updates. So for those of you who are tuning in now, I'm working on these to put them into one video with different chapters. So focusing on the 3 amicus briefs that really lay out, that provide you really all the information and wording and phraseology and argument that you need when you find yourself on the receiving end of people who really either have to have bought into this because their jobs and reputations dependent, or if they're really been kind of indoctrinated, or what I call gender board, whatever, that it really provides that foundation.
Well, that's wonderful that you not only that you have the organizational skill to do it, but that you have the goodness of your heart, because that's, as I think you already said, it's God's work. Well, no, I mean, it's we share this information with each other. We women of the movement, we learn from each other. That's what happens, right? So,
well, yeah, just because also then I can think, okay, now that I know all this crazy stuff, what am I going to do with this? It was never on my to-do list to know all about this stuff. It really, we had to educate ourselves. And for people who've come across it later, for those of us who can reduce the time it takes to find out about all this stuff, to get your bearings.
Right.
And someone's coming at you like, well, clownfish, or you're a transphobe, or no, this has been around since the beginning of time and all this stuff. You're like, whoa.
No, it's good. I mean, people just jumping into this now, like, it must have taken me like a year and a half to finally understand why some men wanted to date lesbians. Okay. Some lady men, they didn't just want to date women. They wanted to especially go and date lesbians. It took me a really long time to find that out. So because of work of women and some men in the movement, now you can just jump in and access that important information. You're a real doctor, but I feel like I deserve an honorary doctorate of like dirty pervs.
If anybody deserves an honorary gender studies degree, it's TERFs.
Yeah, totally.
We should be teaching gender studies classes.
I know.
I mean, the crazy shit I know. I mean, there's stuff I know. I'm like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know about sissy porn. I don't want to know about, people who like to go into the bathroom and hear women pee or offer them tampons. I just really wish to affirm their gender identity. Oh my God. Anyway, so please do like and subscribe. If you want to, we do one of these gender identity war updates once a week, unless one of us is unavailable. Of course, it goes without saying. And morbid symptoms in general, please like, subscribe, follow, share, all this type of stuff. Keep a lookout for the edited. I'll be posting the videos soon. I'm just editing them out for the legal front, the 3 amicus briefs, one by Kara Dansky on behalf of Women Declaration International to the Supreme Court of the United States. This one, which was Alabama, who shared what they found out about the fantastic, illustrious organization that is WPATH during their discovery and trial, and also by Sex Matters for a Scottish court case trying to figure out what you do when somebody's purported gender identity and somebody's actual sex collide in bathrooms, sports, locker rooms, etc. Anyway, any final thoughts, Tanya, about anything? Anything you want to say?
Philippos Casapis says, "What is a TERF? What is a TERF?" Philippos, I am a TERF, and I'm not gonna. I think you're a TERF too, Tara. It's a trans exclusionary radical feminist, but even women who aren't actually radical feminists, although I probably am, but even women who aren't are called TERFs by the men who want to mimic us. So basically it means woman who says no. It's a woman who says no. to
But also, to be
genderism.
fair, there are women
That's a
who call
turf.
us TERFs as well. So it started as a derogatory term for women who
Yeah,
are like,
yeah.
no, you can't identify in and out of your sex. That women
Yeah.
are female. They're not also men who claim to have a woman identity.
Yeah, I'm a
And
turf.
so they first were called TERFs, and it was a derogatory term.
Yeah.
And us ladies and men, there's men as well who are like, no, sex is real. Gender is
Right.
this gender identity is subjective. Sex is real. It doesn't change. So, calm down. And
Yeah.
that's where TERF came. We thought, fine, we'll be, want to call me a TERF? Fine.
Right. But men don't get called turf. But some of them, like Dave Chappelle, they wore that shirt
He's
that
a
said
TERF.
Team Turf.
Yeah.
Team
Yeah.
Turf, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for some reason, go figure, the people who want to pretend or who have decided that there's two types of women, male women and female women, don't like it when us female women say no. There's no such thing as a male woman.
How dare
They
you?
get mad. They get mad at us unintentional,
Yeah.
accidental women.
Right. Turf is the witch, is the modern day witch. Woman who says no.
Mhm.
Anyhow, time to go.
All right. So, but in general, feminism is a bourgeois movement. We need working women movement, I think. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
so what I would say is that, yeah, I mean, this is a common thing, is that for a long time, the women who have dominated the women's rights movements or feminism tend to be from the middle class and elite class because they have the time to do this stuff. But it's true that, yeah, a class focus, and some people have made this argument that they call this kind of a luxury belief, that a lot of the women who will tell us that trans women are women and that we're TERFs and we're bad and we're transphobic and that these male women are women in every important way possible, etc., they tend to be women who won't have to deal of this in their changing rooms, their bathrooms, this type of
No,
stuff.
they
Or they must
won't.
have a trans friend or a relative, and so they've really bought into this ideology, to the point that they will defend Leah Thomas in sports, or they'll support putting men who identify as women in women's prisons, and them going to women's crisis shelters, staying in the women's wing of hospitals, to that point. And
Right.
so there is very much a divide between women on this issue, and between people who would say they're feminists on this issue, because you have feminists who will say, well, if you're a real feminist, your feminism includes trans women, and you have the rest of us who are saying, well,
Sure.
that if men can identify as women, that negates women as a sex
Right.
class and negates legal protections. You can't both have women as human females and as an identity that men can claim. It's not going to
No,
work.
for sure.
And they want to avoid the fact that it's not going to work by making those of us who are saying this is a problem out to be meanies.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
the whole gender identity thing is not a grassroots working class
No, for sure not. No, it's
issue,
for sure not.
concern. That's not what's driving this. There's a lot of money
Yeah.
behind this as well, and a lot of money by really rich
Totally.
men who we would call autogynephiles.
Yeah.
So men who are
Totally.
physically who get off by thinking of themselves as women. So you have
Right.
heterosexual men who come out as quote unquote trans women, who are heterosexual but just like to pretend they're women. And
They're
that
just
is,
fetishistic
they
cross dressers.
tend to be upper middle class elite. So
Sure.
Martin Rothblatt, Pritzker,
Pritzker was in the army.
Rachel
Lots of them come
Levine,
from the army.
Rachel
Lots of them are
Levine,
very conservative.
Rachel Levine, and who else? Marcy Bowers. Yeah, so true.
So true.
Anyway, which is interesting, Philippos, is that a lot of organizations that call themselves Marxist or even communist swallow this gender ideology line, or they pander to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Which makes no sense, because if you're a class-focused organization, particularly a materialist one, it's crazy that they will tell you that trans women are women. And they'll push women out, other people out who don't go along with it. That has happened.
Yeah, it's nonsensical. It's nonsensical. But TERF is what they call all women who say no to gender men. Rich, poor, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're radical feminists or not, you just say no one time and that's it. TERF, 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 TERF. So we've just reclaimed it.
Oh, good.
I am.
So Philippos is, I'm from Greece, and Communist Party here, KK, is against gender ideology. Whoa, fantastic. It's nice to know that they exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what I've
them.
found is that most so you get some of the most unusual, crazy pushback from people who will try to tell me that the gender is rooted in, the gender ideology is rooted in, materialist analysis, and they'll even try to quote angles at you about how somehow they're able to find a justification for gender ideology and this notion that there are two types of women, male women and female women. They try to use Marxism and the canon to justify that. And for some reason, the people who know better don't say, calm down, young people. That's not the case.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to know that there are communist parties that are not, that are holding the line on this stuff.
Yeah, not Japan's. No, not Japan's. But I'm glad Greece. But beautiful Greece. How I'd love to go there. Especially on a cold night like tonight. I'd love to be in Greece instead.
Anyway, Philippos, thank you for tuning in and for the comments.
Yeah, thanks,
all right.
Philippos.
So, yes. All right, Tanya, I need to dash because I have another morbid symptoms tonight. Garrett and Tony are coming on. We're going to do the U.S. 2024 Game of Thrones roundup with the reaction to Trump's victory, but we're also going to posit that what if we look at MAGA as a so-called morbid symptom? So MAGA, the content, you have discontent, you have disillusion, you have this idea that things have gone wrong, they need to change. But the form of MAGA is not socialist or communist, but it doesn't mean there couldn't be a form that is. So we want to talk about maybe the potentials of this leading to someplace else, if some other form is offered to this discontent and desire to set things straight, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Anyway, so please do tune in for that if you'd like. That's going to be at 8 o'clock my time, 8 o'clock UK time, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then California, Tony's in California, that's noon. Doing 3 time zones tonight. And Tony Tony's been watching our updates, and he's like, oh, you should have Tanya come on. I'm like, well, she's in a whole other time zone.
Tony, right?
That won't work.
Tony.
But
I'm shaking my fist because I think that Tony is also TNT. I'm like, no. I'll fight you for it, Tony.
So keep the good job. Keep the good job. Really interesting channel. Thank you, Philippos. Please do like and subscribe.
Yeah. It is
I found you from the Marx Engels Lenin Institute interview. Thank you. Yes. And let's say we have to give props to one of our favorite unicorns, Alexander McKay.
Yes.
Who is a Marxist, a communist, and he doesn't pander to gender ideology. So
yeah, he's nice. That's wonderful.
So he's one of now we have another one, Philippos. So there's 4. We have 4 of these unicorns. Okay. Yeah, men who are Marxists who don't pretend that there's 2 types of that there's female that there's male women. Thank you, Philippos. Right. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
All right.
Oh, is it just me? Yeah.
So, that's it.
That's awkward.
Yeah, so like, hey, that's what happens. Okay, thank you everybody for tuning in. Please tune in again.
Thank you.
We'll probably be up again maybe next Thursday for another update. We're going to focus on another thing that's going on that in terms of what's come out of Pandora's gender box is this idea that kids can be autogynephiles, and that autogynephilia and
Oh my
other
God,
things
is
that
that
used to
next?
be characterized as paraphilia, now people are starting to talk about them in not as terms of identities, but in terms of sexualities. So we're going to talk
Yeah,
about that, and that possible slippery slope.
totally.
Anyway, thank you,
All
Tanya.
right. Thank you for all your work. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
good evening.
you. You
Good
too.
day.
Bye. Yeah,
Bye.
it's all good. All right. So we've talked about making women female again, about what, if any, difference the Trump's victory, the red wave in America will make in terms of gender ideology, in terms of pushing back against this, and talked about how he'll likely undo the changes to Title IX and would likely support a ban at the federal level against these highly experimental, non-evidence-based interventions called gender care, gender pediatric care. And then we talked about the WPATH organization that has, bases their standard of care based on consensus of practitioners who participate in so-called gender affirming care, and that it's not based on any rigorous assessment of evidence at all, and highly politicized, ideologically captured, etc., is what you get from looking at this amicus brief. So be warned about that. And thank you all for tuning in. Please do like and subscribe. And I am trying to find my outro here. I should get ready before I wrap up. Anyway, thank you very much. Oops, sorry. I always do this. Bye, everyone.